Hello, my name is Robert, and I'll be covering the effects of virtual reality-based exercise and the benefits on balance and mobility in elderly adults. So what are the applications of VR in exercise? About 40% of adults age 65 plus fall at least once per year, with about 10 to 20% of those falls resulting in hospitalization. Risk factors that contribute to high fall rates include age-related decrease in postural control and strength. Balance control does improve both postural control and muscle strength, reducing the likelihood of falling. There are conventional training programs which include multifactorial interventions with physicians, pharmacists, physical therapists, nurses, social workers working together to structure exercise programs for the elderly. But the disadvantage of such programs are low adherence. The elderly just don't really want to do it. VR programs have a 30% more attendance rate compared to conventional programs. A list of recognized benefits across all the research articles that I have found included increased attendance and adherence rate, as mentioned before, the ability to tailor programs that are more diverse to the subject's needs, improved mobility, balance, and reduced fear of falling, and enjoyment. Multiple sensory channels can be used in a smaller space. Auditory, visual, and proprioceptive channels are used. Increased motivation and engagement due to the entertainment value, distracting from the monotony of exercise. Going into the research, the first research article by DeVry was a little bit different than all the other ones. It compared 30 young adults with 30 healthier older adults, with ages ranging from 18 to 35 for the young and 65 plus for the elderly. 2 skiing games were used. Xbox's Kinski with the Xbox Kinect and Wii Ski with the Nintendo Wii Balance Board. Subjects steered an avatar down a slalom track while the game tracked time to complete the track and added penalties for missing any gates. The subjects changed speed by leaning forward or backward, shifting their weight left and right to move in those directions. 3D kinematics were captured using 7 optoelectronic cameras. Cho's study examined 32 healthy elderly people between the ages of 65 and 80. They were randomly assigned into either a VR group or a control group. The VR group trained 3 times a week for 8 weeks using a Nintendo Wii Fit program, while the control group received no intervention. The Wii Fit program used 3 games, the ski slalom, table tilt, and balance bubble, with each of the subjects playing each game for 10 minutes each for a total of 30 minutes of intervention. The third article by Neri was actually a meta-analysis. They looked at 28 studies that met the inclusion criteria. They focused on clinical homogeneity, type and duration of interventions, outcomes, and low risk of bias when looking through the studies. They used a statement by Prisma, which is the preferred reporting items for systematic reviews and meta-analysis, to report the studies found, and they followed recommendations using a PICO model, which stood for Population Intervention Comparator and Outcomes. Park's research article examined 30 elderly individuals aged over 65 with no fall experience in the past year and no disease. The subjects were randomly assigned into 2 groups, the VR game group and the ball exercise group, so a more conventional exercise program. Each group performed exercises for 30 minutes, 3 times a week for 8 weeks. The VR group used the Nintendo Wii Fit balance board and played soccer, heading, snowboard slalom, and table tilt. The ball exercise group used a program proposed by the company Janda, which consisted of 20 minutes of bouncing, pelvic tilting right, left, back, forwards, and pelvic circling while sitting on a ball as pictured on the left. There were then 10 minutes of tilting the body to the right and left while putting legs on the ball in a supine position as well as a bridge position. The fifth article by Yasilaprik from Turkey looked at 20 older adults between the ages of 65 and 82. They were randomly assigned into 2 groups, a VR group and a conventional exercise group. Both groups had 3 one-hour sessions a week for 6 weeks. The VR group used a different system than a Wii or an Xbox. It was called the BTS Nirvana VR Interactive System. It prompted subjects to follow on-screen visual displays with audio feedback prompts to maintain stability and balance during standing activities. Results were shared after every session to kind of improve motivation for the next session. The conventional group used a conventional balance exercise under a researcher trained in physiotherapy. The exercises were all conducted in a standing posture with focuses on reducing base of support, closing the eyes, increasing speed of movement, and increasing duration. Lee's study looked at 44 adults over the age of 65 from a senior welfare center in Seoul. They were randomly split into 2 groups, an experimental group and a control group. The experimental group attended a 60-minute training session 2 times a week for 6 weeks using a Nintendo Wii Fit game, a balance board, and a joystick. They used it in a 6-game circuit training style format, where each station had a game, and each game lasted about 6 to 8 minutes. The control group didn't undergo any intervention, but both groups did receive 3 sessions of fall prevention education during weeks 1, 3, and 5, with a focus on risks, causes, and complications of falls and ways to prevent falls. But no specific exercises or methods of physical activity were included, so they didn't mess up the control group. As for results, DeVry found that obviously younger subjects had better balance than older subjects, but they found that older subjects use a larger center of mass displacement, which means that the older subjects moved more when attempting to balance and rebalance and recenter themselves. The study also found that the Xbox game Kinski elicited a larger center of mass displacement than the Wii Ski game. They speculated that this could be because the camera on the Kinect wasn't as sensitive as the balance board for the Wii, so that the camera needed the subject to move larger distances in order to pick up that movement. The younger population had more of a focus on going fast, which showed in the way movements were predominantly in the anterior direction from those 7 cameras that they used to capture kinematics, while the elderly focused on a posterior direction, which showed that they were more focused on slowing down and maintaining control of the avatar. Cho's results showed that the body center of pressure movement area of the VR group with the eyes open improved after intervention. So the VR group's movement area went from about 95 centimeters to about 44.9 centimeters. The control group actually got worse, with a mean area of 99.6 centimeters and then ending at 114 centimeters. The trend also showed great improvements with the VR group with eyes closed. The VR group went from a center of pressure movement area of about 104 centimeters to 35.5 centimeters, while the control group went from about 110 to about 72, which shows that the VR group moved a lot less when balancing and recentering. Neri's meta-analysis started with 376 studies, narrowed it down to 28. 12 of the studies compared VR games to no intervention, while 25 compared VR games to traditional and conventional interventional programs. 1 ended up being thrown out. Several studies found that VR games provided a significant and positive effect on balance and mobility. Neri and group said to take this with a kind of a grain of salt, finding that a couple of their studies found that VR games provided bias over conventional interventional programs by being more exciting and challenging the subject. Timed up and go test findings show that VR games resulted in a decrease of about 1.2 seconds on average, which represents a 9% decrease in future falls by a study led by Kojima. Timed up and go test is where a subject sits in a chair, stands up, walks to a point about 5 to 10 meters away, turns around, walks back, and sits back in the chair. And every second represents a 9% increase in future falls, according to Kojima. Park's research found that after intervention, both groups showed a decreased sway length and sway speed, where the VR group had a decrease in sway length of about 13 millimeters, while the ball exercise group decreased their sway by about 5 millimeters. Times up and go test speeds were significantly different, with the VR group decreasing their time by about 4 seconds on average, with the ball exercise group only decreasing their time by 2 seconds. Again, according to Kojima, that 4-second decrease in time is a 36% decrease in chances that there will be a future fall. Yesilaprak from Turkey, his research found that participation rates for the VR group was 9% higher, but they didn't really include any attendance rates, so take that with a grain of salt. In regards to baseline stats, there were no significant differences. Both groups were pretty much the same in all baseline statistics. With the change coming after the intervention in timed up and go scores and tandem stance duration. Overall improvements were seen in both groups, but they didn't really show definitive answer as to whether VR-based interventions were better than conventional interventions. Lee's research in regards to static and dynamic balance found that the experimental group greatly improved their baseline, after their post-test, after their intervention. For static balance, postural sway improved with eyes open and closed, with a reduction of about 2 to 3 millimeters a second. And for dynamic balance, all parameters improved significantly compared with the baseline in the Berg balance scale, which is basically a list of about a dozen daily kind of active living activities that the subject holds for a certain amount of time, and if they kind of reach out to lean on something for balance or kind of sway a little bit more than they should, their score gets reduced and summed up at the end. The functional reach test and times up and go test all showed improvement in regards to dynamic balance. A sit to stand test was used to evaluate lower leg strength, and the experimental group decreased their time by about 3.5 seconds after training, while the control group only lowered their time by about half a second. So what are the implications moving forward? Based off the results, VR-based interventions for fall prevention do impact an elderly person's ability to reduce the likelihood of falling. The most beneficial type of intervention definitely seems to be the use of the Wii Balance Board, as it forces the user to adjust their center of mass accordingly. The increased adherence that VR-based interventions held based off of an increased challenge, more fun, ease of use, really shows that this style of intervention has the potential to produce greater results than current conventional interventions. These factors increase learning effect by involving multiple sensory channels, such as auditory, visual, and proprioceptive. And one thing that a lot of studies showed that while static balance was improved in the VR groups, conventional groups also had improvements in static balance due to the fact that they included more dynamic balance exercises using balls and other prompts. This implies that dynamic balance exercises have an impact on static balance performance as well, and it'd be interesting to see future studies using VR interventions incorporate more dynamic balance exercises into those interventions to see how greater effect VR dynamic balance interventions are compared to conventional dynamic balance interventions are. Thank you for watching, and references are in the description below.